Hi everyone, it's Rebbetzin Hadassah from Golders Green Synagogue, sharing some ideas on Parshat Behaalotecha. This week's Parsha is just full of different ideas and events, and I just wanted to run through a few of them before we fix onto the idea that we're going to talk about today. So the Parsha starts off really positively. We hear about this amazing relationship between God and the Jews, with the dedication of the menorah, with the establishment of the Korban Pesach, the annual reminder of the Passover, of the Exodus of Egypt, and those people who were so sad to miss out on doing this because they weren't considered tahor to bring the Korban, that a Pesach Sheni, a second Pesach, was given to them. We hear about trumpets that will be accompanying the Jews in their happy times, in their sad times. We hear about a cloud of God that was guiding the Jews throughout the desert, a direct felt presence of God within the Jews. And then something happens and things just go downhill. They go from bad to worse. And it seems to start in chapter 11, where the words say, Vahi ha'am kemit onanim. And the people were like complainers. Rashi explains this use of the way this word is said means that they were looking for a reason to complain. And this was bad in the eyes of God, and God got very upset, and he sent a fire to burn the outsides of the camp. And the people cried out to God, to Moshe, to ask him to pray on their behalf to God. And Moshe prays for them, and the fire subsides. And then without any other thing mentioned, we hear again straight away that there's another complaint. There's more complaining. It says the multitude among them began to have hit'avu ta'ava, they had gluttonous craving. Veyashuvu vayibeku gam bnei Israel, and they returned and they also started crying, the children of Israel, and they said, who will feed us meat? And we see that there's an element of a part of the people that are feeling very disgruntled for some reason, and this is spreading to the rest of the Jews, and they start crying saying, who will give us meat, without any prior discussion about this, which anyways is a strange thing to be complaining about because they had their flock about them and their cattle. And then we hear a bit more about what's going on in the next pasuk. In verse number 5, it says, Zachrenu et hadaga asher nochal b'Mitzrayim. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt, chinam, that was free of charge. It was free. It was easy for us to get. Et hakeshuim, ve'et havatichim, ve'et hachatzir, the courgettes and the watermelons and the leeks, ve'et habetzalim, and the onions, ve'et hashumim, and the garlic. And we see the Jews here are reminiscing on their time in Egypt as though it was a great time where they had all the luxuries of food and delicacies available to them. When actually we know that is not true at all. They were slaves. They were suffering. They were eating the bread of affliction, the matzah. Their children were being murdered. They were being thrown into the desert. It required a long time for all the plagues to happen before they could even be freed. And here we are, just a year and a bit later, and they're complaining that about those times when they had all this wonderful food. There seems to definitely be some sense of disillusionment going on. And they describe in the next verse, Pasuk Vav, Ve'ata nafshenu yevesha. And now the translation I have here says our bodies are dry, but nafshenu means the word soul. Our souls are dried out. Ki bilti ein el haman einenu, because we only have man before us. We only have this man that we're getting every day and nothing else. So the Jews in the desert were in the middle of the desert. There was nothing around them. And every day, single day, God provided them man that they would have to go collect, and then they would grind it and make it into some sort of cakes. And it was the same thing every day, although the commentators explain that this man had the ability to take on different types of tastes, similar to a mother's milk that might taste different depending on what she's eaten or what the baby needs. And here they are complaining about this, even though they're literally being fed in the desert from nothing. And the Sforno suggests that perhaps what's bothering them is that they are totally reliant on God for this man, that they're not able to grow anything. There's no sort of control over the natural elements that they can grow something and expect for it to be there tomorrow. And they're every single day waiting for God. They're dependent on God for this man to come. And perhaps that's one of the things that was causing them frustration or anxiety. And we hear that it talks about the man, and then we hear Vayishma Moshe et ha'am bocha lemishpechotav ish lepatach ohalo. Moshe just comes out and hears the people crying outside their tents, each man with his family outside their tent. And God's anger becomes very strong. And this is seen as bad in the eyes of Moshe. He sees this as terrible, as horrible behavior. And you think it's quite dramatic that they're being provided with food every day. I mean, these are people who were slaves, who were beaten, who didn't know if they would live. And here they are, safe and secure, like being fed every day, and they're crying outside their tents. And we really see a change in how Moshe relates to the people. He turns to God and he complains to God. He said, what have I done that I deserve to be treated so badly, that I need to look after this nation? Did I give birth to them? That I need to carry them and nurse them and take them to the land of their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? And then he says, Lo uchal anochi levadi laset et kol ha'am hazeh. I alone cannot carry the burden, the weight of all this people. Ki kaved mimeni. It's too heavy for me. And then he continues and says, if this is how I have to go on, please kill me because I can't manage. We see an absolute desperation from Moshe in face of Bnei Israel complaining about not having enough meat. And we see Moshe has gone through crisis with them before. The sin of the golden calf, for one example, which just after God had literally spoken to them, they start creating an idol. There's something so deeply negative about what the Jews here are doing that it turns Moshe away from them. And we see how Hashem responds. Firstly, he addresses Moshe's need that he can't carry this burden alone, and he gives him he tells him to gather 70 people to share the burden with. And then he tells Moshe that he will bring the meat for the Jews, which Moshe questions, is even possible for you to satisfy them, to get to have enough meat to satisfy these people's needs. And the Sforno again explains that he's questioning that, if it's not this thing that they're complaining about, it will be something else, because these people cannot be satisfied. And Hashem addresses this complaint of Moshe and says, I will give them meat, and I'll give them so much meat that they will be sick of it. It will be coming out of their nostrils. And indeed, that's what we hear, that Hashem brings a slav, and the people who were most complaining end up dying after eating this meat. And it's a terrible situation. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to explore with you what is going on here. What is the deep destructive nature of this complaint? It appears that there was something bothering some of the people, or the people of Israel. Perhaps there was a sense of unrest or anxiety and not knowing what the next day will bring, and not knowing what the plan is, and not being able to have control over growing their own man. But what they start doing is they start bringing in almost a lot of irrelevant ideas. If you look in the verse, it seems the thing that upsets Hashem most is they say, who will feed us meat? As though no one's been providing for them. And then they say how good it was back in Egypt. And this seems to be the thing that really triggers both Moshe and gets Hashem upset. There's a complete lack of realization, recognition, or gratitude at what has been done to build this nation so far, taking them from people who are slaves to people who can complain about the type of food they're being given. It's almost the opposite. It is the opposite attitude of Dayenu, which we sing every Pesach, that it would have been sufficient, it would have been enough if only this happened. If we were just taken out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If we weren't even looked after in the desert, if we had to fend for ourselves, that would have been enough. This attitude seems to have disappeared. And more than that, there seems to be this thing that's happening, which psychologists call kitchen sinking. So John Gottman, who is a psychologist working a lot with couples, has a few books out, and one of the things he says, which is very destructive when a couple disagree or argue, or anyone disagrees and argue, is this natural tendency to kitchen sink, which means you bring everything into the argument except for the kitchen sink. So you might be upset about one thing, but then you kind of start building up and letting yourself get upset, and you get deeper and deeper into your unhappiness and to your disgruntlement at this person, that you start remembering all the other times that they did terrible things and all the times that they hurt you and upset you, and you bring it all up, which is terribly damaging for a relationship and extremely hurtful to the other person, and not necessarily representative of your views then. You are just feeling upset then, and you're doing this thing of generalizing it and globalizing it to everything in the relationship. And sometimes once things are said, they can't be unsaid. And it's a tendency that we can have that we have to overcome. We have to learn how to separate the issues. So if someone has left the milk out, again, it's no use saying you always leave the milk out, because there are inevitably some times that they don't leave the milk out. And there's no use now reminding them of the time 2 or 5 years ago that they left the freezer open and all the meat ended up defrosting and cost you hundreds of pounds, because that was resolved then and this is now. And it is harmful to bring up things from the past. And I think this is one message that we can all relate to that's happening here, and maybe one that we are challenged with at the moment, given that we are spending more time at home with everyone else and our routines have changed. And of course that we might be having some sort of underlying unrest and anxiety similar to the Jews, where we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We like to know what tomorrow will bring. We like certainty, we like control, and the situation as it is at the moment is so uncertain, and our leaders are uncertain and they're not sure what's going on, and we're taking things day by day, and it's more apparent than ever everything's in the hand of God. And maybe that is something that we need to struggle with, and we need to accept that trusting God means that we have less control, and that it's important to separate that anxiety we're feeling with our interactions with other people and other things that are going on for us. So I hope this is a message that you can bring into your homes, into your relationships with other people, to try to avoid kitchen sinking by separating the issues out and exploring the root of what is bothering you before you address it with someone else, and to just be mindful and aware of when that's happening. And when you see someone else doing that, you can say, I appreciate you're upset, but let's not kitchen sink. Let's not bring everything else in, because that could be something that just turns people away from you. As we see with Moshe, it's the time where he really just turns away from Bnei Israel. Wishing you all health and happiness and a Shabbat Shalom from the Fromson family.